Welcome to Some Joyful Noises, a music podcast with no rhyme, rhythm, or reason. This show is a proud member of the Anazao Podcasts Network. The reason we do this show is for community, not because any of us are music experts, but rather because we believe that music helps shape community, and that's something that's really important to all of us at the Anazao Podcast Network. I'm Joshua Knoll. I am the producer of this show. I say producer and not host because this show has no host. It has no schedule. It has no format. You are just as much the host as I am. If you would like to find out how you could lead your own episode of Some Joyful Noises, then listen to the end of the show for an invitation to lead your own conversation on this podcast. We hope you enjoy this show with no rhyme, no rhythm, and no reason. This is the launch week for our podcast, Some Joyful Noises. The two most important things for a successful podcast is one, reliability and consistency. And then number two is the best first foot forward that you can put. Since this show has no plan and no schedule, we're going to drop the ball on consistency. That means it's extra important that we have a good first foot forward, and we're asking for your help. There's a few things you can do that'll take less than 5 minutes and cost you absolutely nothing that can help our show put our first foot forward. So here's 5 things that will take you less than 5 minutes to do for no cost that would help us. Number 1, share the show. Find a friend, share the show with someone. Number 2, rate and review our show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Number 3, go to podchaser.com and rate and review the show there. Number 4, join our Facebook group, Some Joyful Noises. And then, of course, number 5 is just enjoy the show. Be sure to subscribe, and if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can go to the menu of our podcast to select automatic download. That'll help increase our downloads and tell the algorithms that this show's really important. All of these are also going to be down below in the description in case you forget any. Thank you all again so much, and we hope you enjoy the show. This is the first episode of Some Joyful Noises. We're doing things a little bit differently, not only because this is a show with no planned schedule or any of the host or any of that stuff, but also because this is a kind of a glue for the Anazao Podcast Network. So if you're following any of the other shows on the network, you might be familiar with some of the voices you're going to hear during our launch dates. We're doing a double launch, so some batches of episodes will be released on October 5th and some on October 8th. 5 of the 12 episodes we are doing as part of our launch are actually reposts from other podcasts to kind of show the connective tissue of the Anazao Podcast Network as a whole. This episode is a repost of the Whole Church podcast by Joshua Knoll and TJ Blackwell. In this episode, they are interviewing the professor of worship from Charleston Southern University, Andrew Lucius. This is part of the series they did on the Whole Church podcast around church services. In this episode, they will be discussing how different worship services can be concerning the music we play in our worship gatherings at our local churches. We hope you enjoy this episode. A link to the original audio will be below, as well as a link to the entirety of the Anazao Podcast Network. We thought this would be a great first episode as it explores how churches use music. And since this is a show all about music, we thought that would be appropriate. I am Joshua Knoll, and I am not a host of the show. I'm rather the producer. I wanted to inform you, in this episode, we talk about Skillet and a few other artists favorably, who I now no longer feel as favorably towards, giving some stuff that I have learned about some of these creators. I still think this is a fantastic episode with great content that's very informative and just fun. So we hope you enjoy, and again, stay with us as we continue to just get noisy.
Romans 15, chapters 5 through 9, in the North American Standard Bible read, "Now may the God who gives perseverance and encouragement grant you to be of the same mind with one another, according to Christ Jesus, so that one purpose and one voice you may glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, accept one another, just as Christ has also accepted us for the glory of God. For I say that Christ has become a servant to the circumcision in behalf of the truth of God, to confirm the promises given to the fathers, and for the Gentiles to glorify God for his mercy." Here, St. Paul is writing to the church at Rome, encouraging them to be witnesses to God through their love of one another. He states one goal is to worship God in one voice together, then he commands the church to accept one another. In our context today, with so many different church gatherings and polarization rampant, what does this call to accept one another look like to you now?
You guys are right to point out the idea that the polarizations, churches gathering with different styles and different convictions is really a huge deal. What does this call to accept one another look like now in this context today? Yeah, I think it's got to start with humility, a position and a posture towards others that we may disagree with, to say that ultimately, if this is a brother, if this is a church, that we've got some first tier commonalities. And I think this is where the idea of theological triage becomes really helpful. There's certain issues that we don't have to agree on, and that's okay. But we've got to remember that there are a lot of things that we do agree on. And sometimes those things that we disagree on become elevated in our minds. We neglect the fact that we believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, who was born of a virgin and offered himself for us. We forget that we're in agreement on these larger issues. And so I think that's another part of the answer to this question, not only a posture of humility, but a mindfulness of the theological concepts that we are in agreement with that really make us the church, those fundamental core doctrines that the church has believed for thousands of years.
Amen. Gotta love when someone brings up the 3 tiers in the intro. That's great. Hey everybody, welcome to your favorite church unity podcast on possibly your second favorite church podcast network. I don't know. Could be, could not be. One thing I do know, and this is just a fun fact for everybody, the word legend was actually invented in response. Some people think it was always just, had to do with like mythology and myths. No. The word legend was actually invented when Tiberius 1 was first created. And it was just a word invented to describe my co-host today, TJ, Tiberius 1 Blackwell. How's it going?
Great, thanks.
Yeah. An equal legendary guest we have today, Professor Andrew Lucius. We know him thanks to Dr. Peter Beck, who's been on just a couple weeks ago. Professor Andrew is the professor of worship at Charleston Southern University. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. And this is going to be the end of our church services series. We're just talking about the services of church, and something that got brought up, I think, in every single episode was just how worship was done, or worship and song was done at these different churches. So excited to talk more about that with a professor who teaches that. So should be a fun time.
Yeah, and we wanted to remind you guys, check out the convention website in the description below. You got about 3 weeks, a little less. So check it out. Come visit, hang out with us and your other favorite podcasters. We got to play games, enjoy some clean comedy, a little multicultural worship, and thanks to some generous donations and major changes in our plans, the event will now be a pay-what-you-want event for online or in-person attendees.
Yeah.
We also would like to announce that AMP, our podcast network, Anazao Ministries podcast, has officially launched, and we are a part of it. If you like our show and want to check out others like it, Christian podcasts that aren't afraid to ask the bigger questions, then check out the link in the show notes or just look up Anazao Ministries Podcasts.
Yeah. Always a fun time. Lots of stuff that hopefully should make it more convenient for listeners of some of our shows that are part of that. Now, Professor Andrew, I'm excited to let you know about this. I actually have a very important spiritual practice I do. It's the one clear, definitive way that all Christians can be unified, and it's just by practicing silliness. It turns out if you're silly enough, people do come together.
That is true.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's what VeggieTales taught us all. So today's silly question has been part of a series. We've been trying to figure out where different of our favorite Star Wars characters belong as far as what church denomination we think they would fit in with the most. So today, we're going to ask, what church service do you recommend Finn from the sequel trilogy? Where do you think he should attend? What do you think he would enjoy and agree with most? TJ and I will answer first and give you time to think about it. TJ.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, let's go.
Where's Finn belong?
I want to say Anglican, just on vibes alone.
just cause. Okay.
Just cause.
Fair enough. For some reason, I was thinking he'd be a good Methodist, but I think it's just because he kind of reminds me of Reverend Justin Coleman we had on here. Oh, yeah, Keno too. Yeah, turns out both of the Methodists that I know really remind me of Finn. No, I know other Methodists too. Nothing but it. My cousin's technically Methodist. She does not remind me of Finn. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I'm
like
gonna
that.
say, well, yeah, it's interesting. You guys both put him in the Protestant camp. I think you're right. With that, I think of Finn rebelling against the empire. Right, that's kind of who he is, and coming to that realization himself. So certainly not Catholic. We'll place them
He grew up
squarely as
Catholic.
the empire. Sorry to offend any of your listeners, but I think he's definitely part of he's definitely part of the Reformation. And I was thinking Anglican, actually. Yeah, so I'm going to side with TJ on this. I'm going to say Anglican.
Now, do you have other reasons other than vibe, or are we just sticking with vibe?
Well, I was thinking about, do we compare him to Poe? Because I think in some ways these guys are working together, but they also provide some balance. So Poe is kind of the reckless rebel. He's the Anabaptist.
So right? I was going to say he's the Pentecostal. Okay.
Or it could be Pentecostal. Yeah, he's kind of further out there. Finn is not quite there. So I think he's somewhere between Catholicism and whatever's that other extreme. And Anglican feels right to me there, right in the middle.
Yeah, he definitely.
That argument won me over. I like that.
He reads liturgical to me, but not Catholic. Right. Distinctly not Catholic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very
that's
not
right.
Catholic. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
I love that question.
All right. Me too. Oh man. So for those who've been following on or who haven't been following along, we're doing the church services series. That's a word sometimes. And the reason we started doing this was because we've had a lot of guests. At the end of our episodes, we usually ask, what's one thing you would recommend people do to come together in unity better in the church? And a lot of times people say something like, hey, go visit other churches, see how other people are worshiping. And we're like, okay. A few of us did that and realized, yeah, that can be really overwhelming if you have no idea what to expect at all. Mm-hmm. So we did a whole service to just help people prepare. If you're going to visit these other churches, see how your brothers and sisters worship and what they're doing over there. Now you can do it and kind of know what to expect ahead of time. That's sort of our goal. That being said, we also realize, a lot of people find podcasts the way I do, and they just are like, hey, I'm about to go to a Baptist church, or I'm about to go to this church, and just looked it up. So this might also be someone's first time going to a church or encountering our podcast or anything, in which case, hey, welcome. Yeah.
Welcome. Yeah. Andrew, Professor Lucius,
yes.
Would you mind briefly sharing with our listeners your testimony and what church you're a part of now?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Yeah. So I grew up in a Christian home, and my parents were always in church when I was growing up. Even though they weren't vocationally working in the church, we were there a lot and developed close friendships there. Was a part of a really healthy church. It was a Baptist church, probably leaning more charismatic in some of its practices, especially regarding worship. Very free church, so absence of liturgy, and we could talk about that kind of stuff later. But when I was in high school, just felt the Lord really in the midst of a lot of anxiety, working in my soul and bringing me to the point of seeing I'm a sinner and there's no hope for me without Jesus. And so through conversations with my parents and friends and pastors, I really believe the Lord worked a work of grace in my life, in my heart, to save me from my sins and place me squarely in the church. And from there, it's just been a slow process of sanctification and growth. And I would say the one consistent theme from that moment of conversion to today has been a love for the church. And so right now, my wife and my family, we're involved in a church in Charleston called Friendship Baptist. We're new there. We've only been there about 4 months since moving to Charleston. And it's been a huge blessing. And I can share more about that church specifically if you guys want to dive into that. But that's where we've been worshiping for the last 4 months.
Yeah, that actually was something we were gonna ask about. Is what would you say makes what you say Friendship Baptist Church in Charleston?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. What makes that gathering unique or stand out to you?
The thing that is most on the surface that I think anybody would say this is unique or maybe even weird would be that the church is almost 80 years old. And about 10 to 15 years ago was really struggling, like many churches were, and was really in need of revitalization. There was a school that connected to the church at that time, and the school's a bilingual school, so they speak Spanish and English. And from that school, there's been a lot of people come into the church that are also bilingual. So every other Sunday, we have bilingual services in English and Spanish all in one service. So that's pretty unique. I've never been a part of a church like that. And it's been really neat to see, but also there's been challenges to that, even in the 4 months we've been there. So it's not without challenges. I know a lot of people want to see more multi-ethnic worship, which is great, but it comes with some challenges.
Oh yeah, I friend of our show, occasional guest host, David Pizarro. Actually, I've been learning a lot from him about different technologies that have been invented for like churches and different things, specifically to do bilingual services, so that they can do like both languages at once. And I'm like, that's pretty interesting. Yeah,
that is interesting.
I had heard of before he talked about it. Maybe he'll come on and talk more about it sometime. But it was pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. Maybe so. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest differences outside of the liturgy from church to church that we've discovered is in how churches conduct their worship in song portion of their services. Some liturgical churches spread out hymns throughout the service. Some non-denominational services have modern music in the beginning of their service that could last the whole time. And some do a mix of a couple hymns and a couple modern worship songs before the sermon. When you teach your classes on worship, is it ever difficult to find a starting point when so many people have so many different ideas about what worship is going into it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Next question. Right, great show.
Yeah. Next question. No, it's really challenging. And coming out of the church, so I served in ministry for the last 10 years. And, when you're in pastoral ministry, you're trying to discern what's the heart language of the congregation I'm serving. What is the kind of music that is going to serve them most faithfully, right? And it's a much narrower path. Even if it's multi-generational, multi-ethnic, it's going to be there's a possibility of having a more narrow idea of what that is. But when you move into academics and you're getting students from really all over the country, and you only have them for 4 years, not only is it difficult to figure out where to start, it's a constant challenge to determine where are the students at, where do I need to take them, where's the church at, how do I prepare them for that, how do I prepare them for many different types of churches as far as song selections go. So yeah, it's a really challenging it's a really challenging aspect of it. And we don't need any help having preferences on songs. The students, even 17 and 18 years old, come already with very ingrained preferences, and those preferences become not just this is the stuff I like, but within the church, within worship, it takes on this form of this is what God likes. And I think that's where things really become difficult to work through, because then it's this style is preferable to this style because this is more authentic. Or this style is better because it's deeper theologically, so there's all kinds of different landmines to navigate around that. I think the blessing of being in academics is that I can constantly push the students towards the church to handle those specific questions. Not to say that we don't address them in the classroom, but for me to be able to hold loosely styles that maybe I don't prefer, and say, you know what, there are churches that do. And it may be that God's called you to serve one of those, and you need to be prepared for that just as much as someone would be prepared for a different style.
Yeah.
Okay. So you talk about getting prepared. I'm just curious as far as like what components do you teach? Like, do you teach them the songs themselves, the instruments, or just kind of more theologically, like what's behind the words? Is that
right? Yeah, we're going to do both of those things. I think the idea of teaching what's behind the words is probably more unique and rare as far as the worship academics as I see it. But it is something that we're concerned about. We want students to be able to look at a song and discern what kind of theology is being taught in this song. You could even maybe label that as lyrical theology. What kind of lyrical theology is is in our church, and how is that shaping and forming people to believe certain things. So we do talk about that. What I'm hoping to do most with our students is give them the tools that they need to be able to do it themselves, not just give them all the answers. So it's not a setting where, I'll say we need to sing these songs but not these songs, or we need to sing lyrics like this but not like this. I'm hoping to dive deeper in that and cultivate in the students discernment and the tools needed for them to be able to do it themselves. Because I don't want them to be calling me, in 10 years, hey, what do you think about this? I want them to be able to navigate those waters themselves. So, to answer your question, there's both. We're going to do these songs. We're probably not going to do some other songs in our ensembles or in their worship projects as they get ready to graduate. But more than telling them what to do, I'm hoping to help them understand how to do the work of theological and lyrical analysis so that they can make their own conclusions about those things.
Yeah. You don't want to deal with any, the weekly phone call of, can we play Reckless Love at worship?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Now you said you don't teach them which lyrics to say or not say, but I do assume you at least tell them it has to be Sloppy Wet Kiss when they're doing How He Loves, right?
Yeah.
No.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the copyright on that's you could go either way. You could go Unforeseen or Sloppy Wet. To be honest, I'm not sure which one's worse.
I would like to take an official stance on Unforeseen. I don't like Sloppy Wet. That's keep that away from me.
This is where the division starts, because I'm Sloppy Wet. That's
you sure are Sloppy Wet.
My thought process is really like more like artist power, where I'm like, but that's what he intended it to be, and then changed it because people were trying to cancel it, and I'm like, no, I'm too big freedom of speech. What he originally intended, that's what I want.
I've got a different reason, but I'm going to side with you, Joshua. Ooh. I'm going to go with Sloppy Wet as well, because the idea of Unforeseen just sounds terrifying to me, especially
that's also scary. Yeah.
A culture of a lot of problems in the church regarding like sexual morality kinds of stuff. I'm going to refuse the Unforeseen kiss. I'll take the Sloppy Wet.
Yeah. So really, when you sing "Oh How He Loves Us," you're choosing between being terrified or being grossed out.
That's right. Exactly right.
Great times. Getting a little bit back on track. What's it like to go to a class on worship? If I were to be a student, do I get taught like a specific structure? Like, I know you said not what songs to use, but do you teach them, like, in certain churches you have to do hymns and break it up this way, in some places you got to do too fast, too slow? I mean, do you ever go through like this overall structure of a service when you do it?
Yeah, we sure do. So this fall, actually, we've got a class called Worship Leadership. And we'll be reading a book by a lady named Constance Cherry called The Worship Architect. And she goes through ideas of building services, what different services historically have looked like. Brian Chappell's got a book, Christ-Centered Worship, where he does some similar stuff I think is helpful. So yes, we're going to really go at this from primarily historic study of what the church has done, going all the way back to 2nd, 3rd century, and moving through the Reformation. What changes happened in the Reformation? What were the things that were rejected and thrown out of worship? There was when we think about the Reformation, I think we think a lot about sola scriptura and these kinds of things and theological changes, but there's significant worship changes happening there as well. So we'll look at that. But the part of the class as well is exposing students to different styles. So they'll be required to go to 3 different worship services and then write reports on those 3. They have to be different in style. So one has to be a Catholic church, one has to be a liturgical evangelical church, and then the last one can be a liturgical free church. So again, just trying to expose them to as much as we possibly can, so that they're not as shaken, right, when they see, this is very different. I hope they will have thought through the process of planning the service, what other churches do, why they do it. And I think one of the things that I've come to see too is a lot of the elements between different church services are very similar. The structure changes, whether the prayers are read or not, that changes. The place of the supper versus the preaching changes. But a lot of it is all the same elements. It's just a matter of how they're positioned together and how the church interacts with them and with the pastor that's leading it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, some of the minor changes, it's easy for yourself. Like I think it's just like human condition to elevate it because it's not what you're familiar with. But when you really think about it, you're like, that's not first year. I shout out to our friend Will. I went to Pastor Will's church. He's Lutheran church. I've been attending a different Lutheran church, and I'm still kind of getting used to it. I grew up Pentecostal, so it's very different. I'm just at the point where I just accept it. I'm not going to know the hymns at all. What hymns we're doing, I'm not going to know them for several years. It's fine because there's a lot of them, and I'm not familiar with most of them. But last week, there was two things that caught me off guard. When they did the Apostles' Creed, instead of he descended into hell, he descended into death is what they said. And I said the wrong word. And it's always awkward when everybody's saying the same thing. And you're like, oops. Yeah. I was right, by the way, but oops. Yeah. And then the other one was they did the Holy, 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 the hymn, the Holy, Holy. Yeah. And I got so excited. I was like, it's a hymn I know. Yeah, the words are different, though. So I didn't know it.
Well, and that brings up an interesting idea, you know, with the movement towards digital music and away from hymnals, especially in Baptist churches or free churches. You could go to a church that's almost exactly the same in its liturgical structure, but find very different music sung.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's only going to become more common as we move forward into a digital age that's kind of post-hymnal.
Oh, yeah. I did want to ask, though, because, you know, some of the more liturgical churches, they do like the hymn spread out like that, whereas a lot of your other churches just do the worship songs in the beginning. Do you have a preference on that? Like as far as like breaking the music up, not like necessarily what type, but do you like it broke up better or do you like it in the front better?
I'm going to avoid your question by answering it a different way. No, I don't know that I have a strong preference on, you know, do we put all the songs up front and then the preaching or spread it out. I think what I want to see is a service that feels like one element flows into the next. Yeah. So what I would want to avoid is, you know, the first 30 minutes is the music guy and that's like his show. And then the preacher comes out and does his thing. And then the music guy comes out for the final song and nothing really seems to fit together. I think the ideal service would be one that's been thoughtfully organized in a way that one element flows into the next. I think there's some significance of how the church has worshiped for thousands of years that we need to at least consider. And as a part of that, things like confession and assurance of pardon, I think should be at least part of our services in some ways, which might break up that first section of music a little bit. But I think generally what I would want to see more than, you know, musical preferences is a flow to the service that makes it feel like one consistent kind of event and not broken up into multiple events within 1 hour and a half time slot.
Yeah.
Did you, is there a theological reason behind your desire to have it flow, or is it just kind of like because, you know, just me as someone who's sitting there, I'm like, you know, it would just be nicer if it flowed.
Yes. Right. Yeah, I think there are some theological reasons. One of the passages that shaped my philosophy of worship more than any other is 1 Corinthians 14:26. And this is, of course, coming at the end of Paul's section on thinking about the church's worship at the church at Corinth, right? So worship should be orderly. 1 Corinthians 13 is about love. That's not for your wedding day. That's for the church. This is how the church should be loving one another.
Amen.
He talks about spiritual gifts and speaking in tongues. The end of all of that, kind of the capstone verse of all of that, he says, let everything be done for the building up. And so I think that really should frame the service itself. And I think it builds up the church. I think we're more faithful in building up the church when we have a very thoughtful approach to our worship service that's organized in a way that makes it seem cooperative and focused on the message of the gospel.
Yeah. So like that. Personally, I think churches kind of need to backtrack just a little bit, like 6-7 years. Hymnals just need to be replaced with nooks with the hymnal on it, and that's it.
There you go.
It's almost modern. It's doing their best. You still get the words. You can still pretend you know how to read music.
That's right.
That's one part I never understood. Like I can tell what this means. Why is this here for everyone else?
Yeah.
So at the Lutheran churches, everyone I've been to so far, DJ, they give out the handbook. Can't think of the word right now. It's not
Brochure,
called a flyer.
pamphlet.
Yeah, sure.
Bulletin?
Yeah, the pamphlet. And it has the entire thing laid out and all the words to everything. So you could just read it and you're good. But it does have the music signs on there. And when I visit my grandparents, I've seen that, but I've never actually seen that in a church like that I went to. So I'm like, okay, these are here. And that was another thing that threw me off at Will's church. Every time I have seen that, we always skip line 3 for some reason.
Oh, yeah.
So I just immediately skipped line 3 when I was reading the songs, and they don't do that. Yeah.
You got.
Yeah, I sure did.
So, Andrew, do you have like a number one piece of advice for somebody who's trying to decide on the structure of a worship service?
Just one. Yeah, I think it's probably consistent with the verse I just mentioned from 1 Corinthians. Let the worship service be for the church and not for you. And I think there's a real subtle temptation for the worship service planner or the lead pastor, or preaching pastor, or the worship leader to pick and arrange certain things so that they can do something they enjoy, which is not inherently wrong, but I think it may miss the more valuable perspective. And I think it's also important to say here that Paul's exhortation in 1 Corinthians is that everything be done for the building up of the church. So the worship service should be focused on the local church, those in membership, in some ways to the exclusion of outsiders that would be coming in that are not believers. Their exposure to the preaching of God's word and the church enjoying God together is what's meant to lead them to repentance, not necessarily entertainment that then in some way prepares them to receive the gospel. I heard somebody say once, what you win them with, you win them to. And I think that's what Willow Creek found in their worship practices of a more seeker-sensitive church model, is that in the end of the day, we've got a lot of people that have become members of our church, profess Jesus, but they know nothing about him. And so I think that's a danger we've got to avoid. So I would say, number one piece of advice, plan your worship service for the church.
And how would you say worship leaders can know when they're doing it for the other reasons that you mentioned, and how do they avoid that better?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it assumes that you know the church, right? So I think this speaks to the value of longevity in ministry. Those that have been at a church for 5 to 7 years are doing this better than those that have only been there 1 year. Those that have been there for 30 or 40 years are doing it best, probably. It's a general statement, but I think that should be the case. So I think that's one thing. The worship leader, worship planner needs to know the people. So spending time with them, knowing what they're dealing with, knowing what songs minister most to them, knowing what moments in the service, are going to impact them the most. In the same way that a preacher might think in his sermon, this point that I'm going to make is going to be especially encouraging for this person in my church. The worship service planner should also be thinking, this moment in the service is going to be especially encouraging for this person in my church, or especially convicting. And to be honest with you guys, I think that's probably the thing I miss most about ministry, now moving into academics, is being able to look out over a congregation and know what they're struggling with, know what the sorrows are, and then to be able to sing songs and to have elements of the service that are really meant to encourage them. So that would be a positive way, right, to try to move in that direction. I think the questions to ask for a worship leader to discern if they've moved into an area that maybe isn't helpful would be, why, or maybe ask this first: what kinds of songs are we choosing, and are they congregationally friendly? And there's a lot of things that we could unpack about that. How many times do we have moments in our service where the congregation isn't participating? I think that's a huge question. And there's probably others as well that we could come up with that would be more diagnostic of, are we really moving towards the people, or are we moving towards performance or those outside the church? Because really the idea of liturgy isn't order of worship. Liturgy literally is the work of the people. And so our liturgies should not just be worship service orders. They should be worship service orders that are focused on giving the church, giving the people of God work to do in worship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So do you have like one good piece of advice for anyone who wants to visit a new church where they might do worship differently?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is that it's a really brave thing to go into a church you don't know. And I think that's something we easily forget if we've been at a church a long time. Maybe just, one Sunday, take a little adventure out to a church you've never been to. It can be terrifying, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's all these questions that we're asking. Is someone going to come up to me and ask me a question that I'm not going to know the answer to? Is it going to be awkward? Am I going to be uncomfortable? Am I not going to know what's going on the whole time? So there's a lot of things in it. So that's the first thing I would say is, if you're looking for a church, or you're feeling that maybe the Holy Spirit's leading you to a new place of worship, that's a really brave choice. And to follow Jesus in that is commendable. As far as practical advice, though, I think one of the things that is helpful anytime we have something new, whether it be a new job or in this case a new church, is to observe and learn. To leave our mouths closed and just watch. And so I think that would be my first and maybe biggest piece of advice would be, go into the church and sit in the back and watch, and don't feel guilty about that. Just watch how this church worships the Lord and be encouraged by it. Be open-minded to it. None of us have gotten worship perfectly. The New Testament is as far as worship practice is concerned, is pretty open. And so there's a lot of flexibility within that. So with an open mind, go and watch, and maybe even ask the question, where do I see God moving in this congregation? And just give it time. Just give it time. But I think it's helpful for us to be exposed to different styles that we aren't accustomed to.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. You have students check out Catholic Church even as part of that whole exercise. Yeah. So you mentioned that when they're picking their worship songs, that part of it should be, how is this impacting this person in my church and that kind of thing. Is there ever a moment where, when you're thinking of times in the service as a worship leader, that you're like, this song's really going to bring the church together? Is that ever really a focus of worship music?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can speak from my experience, which is only 10 years, so fairly limited. But I do think, the church I was in was, when I came, was very multi-generational. So we had people that were almost 100, and we had, children, infants that were, 6 months old. So trying to figure out, how do you create a service of worship where such a huge age demographic is going to be served? That's a big question. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to come at it first by saying, when we're not singing the thing that you want, or when we're not doing the thing that you want, this is a great opportunity for you to defer to your brother or sister who does want this aspect. Mm-hmm. There are unique moments, though, where you're able to bring both together. And I'm really thankful, honestly, for the modern hymn writing that's happening today. I think it's a really wonderful movement, and we don't just need that, but we do need that. Mm-hmm. So I had a senior adult after we introduced Matt Merker's arrangement of "He Will Hold Me Fast," one of the new hymns coming out of Getty Music right now. Mm-hmm. They came up to me, and probably at that time they were late 80s, and they said, "I love that song. I want you to do it at my funeral." I'm like, okay, that's morbid, but sure. Yeah. But at the same time, the instrumentation's modern. At the same time, we had college students that were really becoming attached to it as well, which really just reminded me that the church longs to sing together and they long to
Mhm.
sing good songs together. And it's hard to find those songs, but they do exist. I think that's one of them. And oh wow, what a beautiful moment it is when you can see true unity across different ages, different ethnic groups. And not always possible, but certainly a foretaste of what will come, right? In Revelation, where we see every
Yeah.
tongue and tribe and language around the throne in great unity, worshiping the Lord together.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I this is only tangentially related, but Jimmy Edom teased that there might be a volume 2 to his hymn session album. And I'm
Okay.
really excited about that. So it was
Yeah.
just
Awesome.
today he posted on his Facebook and I was like, do it.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, we're actually at the convention. We're dropping the whole church hymn session. So
It's just TJ playing the didgeridoo to different hymns.
yeah,
Yeah, it's fine though.
I think you'll find a large market for that.
huge,
I hope
massive.
so.
The Aboriginal demographic is all ours.
There you go.
So outside of the actual church service stuff, we did have a couple other questions.
Yeah.
What do you think of the more current worship music that's being made? And do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I think we need to be able to express to God our love for Him, our affection for Him, the theology we believe, in multiple styles and with multiple tools of expression. And so modern songwriters are really giving us vehicles for that. I think there is wisdom to say that there's some songs that are more congregationally appropriate and other songs that I'm going to jam out on 5 days a week. And I love it, but I'm probably not going to sing it in church. That's okay. We need those songs too. And I won't give you any examples of ones I'm thinking of right now, but I do think there are some really helpful songwriters that are writing in a more contemporary style as well. I think there has always also been errant theology in hymns and in contemporary music, and I think that's the case today as well. So we have to be careful with what we are listening to and what we expose our churches to. Again, that gets back to just the thoughtfulness and intentionality with the lyrical theology side of it. Mm-hmm. But no, I'm encouraged by really the amount of songs that are being written today. And I think one of the things we've got to do better at is song curation. I don't know if you guys saw the article that came out a few weeks ago that was looking at CCLI's top 25 and really was revealing to say that there's really only about 4 or 5 groups that are writing top 25 CCLI songs. I think that's probably not a good thing. I think we've got to diversify a little bit, because if we're only getting, to get back to the question, if we're only getting a certain kind of genre of worship, then we're probably impoverishing our souls a little bit. So I think we've got to diversify more. I think we need songs that help us express our love and affection, but we also need songs that are going to help us die well. And so we've got to get a bigger theology in our contemporary music movement right now. And I think it's happening. It's just going to take some time. Does that answer your question? I can't remember what the question was.
Yeah. But do you have a favorite contemporary song?
Oh, favorite contemporary song. That's a good question.
It was just like an extra question we tagged on.
Yeah, that's a good question. Listen
to 1,000 Foot Crutch's new album.
I was gonna say it's okay if he says TJ's rendition on the didgeridoo.
Yeah, the didgeridoo. Oh man.
Yeah, the didgeridoo hymn sessionals, the whole thing.
Oh, you know what? There's one by Tomlin that's newer that I was just listening to the other day, and I thought, man, this is a good song, but now I can't remember the name of it.
That's always how it goes.
Yeah,
it's a Tomlin song. They're all the same.
They're all the same.
Maybe is it easier to say? Do you have a favorite old hymnal that's like really your jam?
An old hymnal or an old hymn?
Or a hymn.
Oh, there's a difference between a hymnal and a hymn.
A hymnal is the book.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Okay, I thought that was just hymn was just short for hymnal.
Mm-mm.
Man, that's just one of those like blind. Okay.
I do have something I'm going to show you guys in a second with hymnals, but no, favorite hymn is probably going to be oh man. Yeah. All right. this is a little obscure, but it's one I really enjoyed right now. It's called God Moves in a Mysterious Way by William Cooper. And yeah, it's really good. It's really good. Maybe a second honorable mention would be Dear Refuge of My Weary Soul by Anne Steele, the OG Baptist hymn writer. So for those of you that don't know, go look up Anne Steele.
Good
All right.
stuff.
Can I show you a hymnal real quick? Because this is awesome.
Yes.
This is awesome and fun. All right, hang on.
Hey, TJ, while he's doing that, do you have a favorite hymn?
No.
Well,
No favorite hymns.
I do. Prayer
We aren't
Bells
a
of
hymn
Heaven.
church.
But it has to be like an old Southern Pentecostal lady singing it, like who's really going to get it. But then, yeah, Prayer Bells of Heaven. And if you could do that on the Did You Do That, be great. Maybe you could use the bell also.
So I wanted a Methodist hymnal, so I ordered
cool
one.
Looking.
Yeah, I ordered one
cool
off of eBay. So I didn't know this at the time, but you guys, are y'all familiar with like Calvinistic theology and tulip and all that?
A little.
Yeah, we've done at least one episode on that.
Okay, so Wesleyans were more or less the opposite of all those things.
Yeah.
We're not Calvinistic. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So if you open it up, it's got this, the hymnals presented to, I don't know if you can see it, and it's presented to Tulip Street Church.
That's funny.
And I just think that's awesome.
That's perfect. There couldn't be a more perfect thing.
I know. It just felt good.
Yeah.
Felt appropriate. Okay, sorry for the digression, but I had to show you that.
That's the best example of church unity ever.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So how do the more out of line Christian bands like Skillet, Lecrae, Toby Mac, Red, how do they play into this conversation for you?
Yeah, I think the CCM movement is so fascinating. If you go back to the 80s, you got kind of the beginnings, the genesis of all that. And I'll never forget, my first CD was Stephen Curtis Chapman, The Great Adventure. You guys probably
that's a good one.
Have never heard that one, but
I got a bunch of Stephen Curtis Chapman for some reason.
Okay, well, there you go. So that was a market. It was CCM. It wasn't worship music, right? It was never intended to be sung in the church. Nobody's singing The Great Adventure in the church in the 80s. So something happens really, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, partially because of what's happening with Passion, partially because of what's happening with Hillsong. You've got Integrity Music as well in Alabama. Kind of all these things are happening, Paul Beloche and others. And all of a sudden, there was this market that opened up for praise and worship music, which really now includes Passion, Bethel, Hillsong, Elevation. Those are the main ones right now. And because that got so big, the contemporary Christian movement focused so much on that and kind of left guys like you mentioned, Lecrae and Toby Mac and Skillet. And so I see them in this other category of they're not writing songs for the church. That's really not their intention, right? Lecrae's not writing his music and hoping that people are going to sing it in church. But what he is hoping is that he'll be able to communicate a message to believers that will have some kind of influence over how they live their life and what they believe. And I think there's a place for that. I think we don't have to, well, let me say it this way. I think that Christian music does not have to equal church music, if that makes sense. We can have Christian music that's really good and really thoughtful and really musically excellent. In fact, we need that. That doesn't have as its main purpose to get in and be sung in churches. We need both. And that's where I would put Skillet, Lecrae, Toby Mac, other guys like that. Really great music. We need it. Not going to sing it in church.
Although, if they did make a hymnal version of Lecrae's Background from a while back, that would be pretty great. That's a good song.
Okay, all right. Well, Lecrae, if you're listening, there you go.
Yeah. Now, I'm interested, while TJ's figuring out that I put him on mute because the straw noise was bad. Where does Casting Crowns fall in this? Because some of their songs I'm like, no, that could be a worship song. And then some I'm like, okay, that was definitely just entertainment. Sure.
Yeah. I think it's probably going to be difficult to completely put people on one side or the other. Yeah, because it may be that Skillet comes out with a song that's like, this is really good for the church. We need to sing it. So it may be even album by album, song by song. We've got to evaluate that, not necessarily band by band.
Fair enough. Because, sometimes Casting Crowns concerts do just become church service.
Yeah. And maybe groups, this is a little old school, but, Delirious, Audio Adrenaline, Newsboys, those guys would have been hitting some of the same kinds of things. Like I remember singing some of their songs in youth group growing up, and we probably could have brought those over into the church if it was contemporary enough in its worship style.
Yeah. I really like the Christian bands that are doing more to not just be like it felt like it was either worship or it had to be rap or rock, and they didn't just do normal music. So seeing like Need to Breathe doing some like folky stuff, I was like, yeah, good. Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah. I like Rend Collective.
Oh yeah, they're really good. I do love them, especially their Campfire albums.
Yeah. So, do you have any questions or thoughts that get you really excited when a student like brings them up that we haven't asked about yet?
That's a good question. I think anytime I have a student that's making connections between musicianship and what's happening musically and pastoral care, those things make me excited. And theology is a part of that too. But, when I have a student maybe reference something that happened or a way in which they were able to use music to help move people to greater hope in God, or maybe asking questions around that. How do I use music to help encourage the church? Those are the questions that get me really excited, because I think that's when you see people are thinking about, at least as I see it, thinking about these kinds of things rightly. This is really a tool. Music and lyrical theology is a tool that should be used for spiritual formation of believers. And so, when students begin to make those connections, that makes me excited, because that makes me think, all right, we're accomplishing something here. And these are going to be people that are able to serve church members well.
Yeah. What a good answer. Yeah. So earlier you told us your number one piece of advice for attending a church that does worship differently was to sit and listen, watch and learn. So what do you think could happen if everyone attended a different church to see how other Christians worshiped and just watched and learned?
Yes, it needs to happen. That needs to happen. Yeah, because I think sometimes the perception is we've got the right way to do it and everybody else is wrong.
That's right.
And and I maybe just even kind of my own experience probably was thinking that way too. And the more I'm exposed to different worship styles, the more I realize, you know what? The Holy Spirit's here too. and it could even be that, in a different church, there's something for us to grab, something for us to gain that we can't find in our own church. And certainly we need to be committed to one local church. But as we're able to experience others, I think there's so much value in that. Top shelf would be a growing towards greater humility and charity towards other believers. I appreciate you guys and how that's such a focus of what you're trying to do. And even related to that, the ultimate sin of the early church wasn't sexual immorality. It was being divisive. It was schismatics. That's what the church hated. Augustine talked very critically about schismatics, and we've lost that post-Protestant Reformation. The idea of the church is one, and so I think what would we gain? We would gain greater humility. We would gain greater unity. I think we would gain greater understanding of diversity in worship. So I really don't see any reason not to encourage people to, on occasion, attend other churches. And it could be there's opportunities around holiday seasons to do that. My wife and kids and I went down to an Anglican church for a Good Friday service a couple weeks ago. It was amazing. I was so encouraged. I'm not going to join the church. I've got a church and I'm committed to that. But man, it was so encouraging.
Yeah. Now, did you see Finn from the Star Wars sequel trilogy?
No, I didn't. And in fact, we were ushered to the very front row. So I didn't follow my own advice. And maybe that's coming out of that experience even. Yeah, I did not see Finn there, but maybe he was in the balcony singing in the choir.
Yeah, must have been.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, we like to do a segment called our God Moment. And we just bring up a moment recently in our lives, whether it be a blessing, challenge, moment of worship, where we saw God in our lives. And I always make Josh go first to give myself and our esteemed guest as much time as we need to think about, our past week or 2 or 3 or, however long. So Joshua, do you have a God moment for us this week?
Yeah, I in a weird way is planning on going to a concert, Judah and the Lion. So not a Christian song concert, but not like a not Christian concert. But they actually had to cancel because of weather, so it kind of stunk. And my whole plan was to go to Wilmington and then stop on the way back in Raleigh, hang out with my best friend, and then see Pastor Will. Well, the concert got canceled, so I really didn't have a reason to go on the trip anymore. And I just had realized it had been at least a couple years since I just went on a trip for the purpose of seeing my friend. So I got to go just for the sole purpose of us being together and hanging out and doing stuff, and got to see Pastor Will, and just kind of a reminder of the blessing it is sometimes to just fellowship in person with other people, and just going on walks, talking to Will, going to church service, and experiencing God with my friends. It was cool.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. See, you invited me when I thought it was just a Judah and the Lion concert. If I knew we were going to go see our friends, I would have said yes.
Oh, my bad. My bad.
Secret's out now.
Yeah. So for me, of course, you all know the Stanley Cup playoffs are on. I'm just kidding. Mostly.
I was expecting that, though.
But we are getting super, super busy at work. And the other day, this nice lady came in, horribly busy. It's Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
If you go to Chipotle after church, please stop. There's so many of y'all. But this woman was so incredibly kind and, wanted to spread the word with us. And I felt really bad because we're slammed. We're too busy to actually talk. But the fact that someone is out there trying to spread the word, even as they're getting lunch, is really nice to see. I love to see that.
That is pretty cool. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, for me, I was sitting on our we've got like this little back patio area, and I was sitting outside. I guess it was yesterday. Right before I was having to come into work, and the weather was beautiful, and the breeze was blowing. I was reading the Proverbs, and it just felt so good. And it was just one of those moments of kind of isolation, prayer, and just feeling the Lord's presence. And it was so encouraging. So that was probably the most recent moment for me.
Yeah, I love those moments. Those are great.
Yeah, it's so nice.
Yeah,
the spring so cool. Cultivates a lot of those too.
Yeah, I might go have that moment right now, actually.
There you go.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed the episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or an enemy. Share it with a cousin.
Yeah,
we like it when you do that. Yeah. The convention, if you attend, you will be able to attend one of our mini panels, of which I agreed to be the host of none, and will be hosting several. So come check it out, perfect. Hang out. There's a ping pong table in the building.
Yeah, that's the reason you should go. That
and,
Will had a crazy idea. I got to tell you about Will's idea. I'm going to do it right now, actually. So Killer Bunny's in the Quest for the Magical Carrot, that game that we love, that we're going to have the ultimate rematch and invite other people to join us. And Will just figured out they have a setup and can get a camera overhand so the people who watch live can just experience like a poker game, us playing Killer Bunnies. And that sounds fantastic. So people should know.
Welcome to the convention. That. Watch us play this card game.
Exactly. Oh, man. Also, if you want to check out other shows from the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network, there's a website link down below so you can see all the other shows that, just Christian podcasts that aren't afraid to ask the big questions. Of course, thank you all for listening to this series. If you've listened, if this was the only one you listened to, this was the end of a series. Go check out the rest. Yeah.
but we hope you enjoyed it anyway. Come back next week. We'll be interviewing Josh Patterson about his podcast, Rethinking Faith. After that, we'll have a couple of live recordings from our upcoming convention, including the audio stream of the Killer Bunnies rematch. After that, Don Cock of the You Have Permission podcast will be joining us. And then finally, at the end of season 1. What?
I was just saying, it is Coke, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
Good. Thank God. And finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will be joining us.
Yeah. Just yeah. He doesn't know about it, but yeah.
Yeah, he's actually just going to show up to the convention.
Yeah, poor Francis. Yeah. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Some Joyful Noises, a proud member of the Anazao Podcast Network. You can listen to other Anazao podcasts with the link that's down below in this show's description. If you have ideas for this show or would like to lead one of these episodes, then you can email us at anazaoministriespodcast@gmail.com and pitch an idea to us, and we'll talk about it and see whether or not we can make it work for you to lead your own episode. We hope to hear from you soon, and that you'll help us keep it noisy. This is the launch week for our podcast, Some Joyful Noises. The two most important things for a successful podcast is 1, reliability and consistency. And then number 2 is the best first foot forward that you can put. Since this show has no plan and no schedule, we're going to drop the ball on consistency. That means it's extra important that we have a good first foot forward, and we're asking for your help. There's a few things you can do that'll take less than 5 minutes and cost you absolutely nothing that can help our show put our first foot forward. So here's 5 things that will take you less than 5 minutes to do for no cost that would help us. Number 1, share the show. Find a friend, share the show with someone. Number 2, rate and review our show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Number 3, go to podchaser.com and rate and review the show there. Number 4, join our Facebook group, Some Joyful Noises. And then, of course, number 5 is just enjoy the show. Be sure to subscribe, and if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can go to the menu of our podcast to select automatic download. That'll help increase our downloads and tell the algorithms that this show's really important. All of these are also going to be down below in the description in case you forget any. Thank you all again so much, and we hope you enjoy the show.